All right. Hi, everyone. I won't say good morning or good afternoon because I know we're all calling in from many different time zones, but hello, happy to have you here. So welcome to today's event, Youth in Climate Action. My name is Eliza Campbell, and I'm an Associate Director for Impact and Innovation at MEI, and also a fellow in the in the cyber program, but I work a lot on issues related to the intersection of climate and tech. So today, this is an event, is the third in a week of special programming excuse me, which we're hoping will highlight the expansive impacts that climate change has in the Middle East and by extension more broadly in the world. Climate change in the Middle East affects every aspect of society, including food and water security, migration, social fabric, governance, employment, economy, and so many other issues that are of critical importance to the region. Today's discussion will feature the work of young scholars from across the Middle East and North Africa to help explore some of the commonalities and communities, while also seeking to explore pathways to combat climate change and its worst impacts in the region. So first, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So we have Malak Al-Tayeb. She's an information analyst at Storyzy and also a freelance writer and content creator who works a lot on issues related to agriculture and climate change. Next, I'm pleased to welcome Khaloud Al-Ajarma. Khaloud is the Al-Walid Lecturer in Globalized Muslim World at the University of Edinburgh with research interests in environmental concerns across the contemporary Muslim world, and has a variety of other interesting research interests as well relating to political change, feminism, and things of that nature. Next, we have Joan Adel. Joan is a geomatician at Marshika Med, and Joam is also an environmentalist and is highly motivated and passionate about coastal and landscape management. Finally, I'd like to welcome Vera Noon. Vera is a youth ambassador with UNESCO International and a maritime spatial planner. In her role, she plays a key part in empowering women, the maritime sector's representatives, minorities, and youth to actively participate in maritime spatial planning. And so we have a great group of panelists here today with really deep and interesting expertise in a lot of different areas related to environmental management, climate change mitigation, and governance from across a variety of spectrums. So we'll have a really wide-ranging discussion, which I'm really looking forward to. And I'm hoping that people will submit questions to use Zoom's Q&A feature, which you can find on your Zoom screen. And for those of you calling in by phone or watching our panel on the live stream, you can ask a question by emailing events@mei.edu. Or if you have any technical issues, please also email events@mei.edu. Feel free to ask a question at any time during the roundtable. We'll be factoring them in as much as we can, and I hope it'll lead to a really lively discussion. So without any further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. So first, I kind of want to start broad because all of the young scholars, I should say, young only in the sense that you're all kind of emerging leaders in your field, are coming from a variety of backgrounds, kind of a really diverse set of perspectives about what climate change is, how it impacts governance and society, and ways that we might mitigate its effects. And so I think it's really crucial to admit that human error and bias, whether it's discrimination in hiring or misplaced understanding on the part of policymakers or economic inequality, is just as much a part of mitigating climate change as the actual climatology and climate change policy itself. So it's as much about integrating in the right kind of perspectives and sort of balancing, finding equity in how we make these policies as it is the governance itself. So I'd like to start kind of by going broad, and I'll go around and ask each of you. We can start with Khaloud, and then I'll prompt each of you. So what would you say from your position and your background, from your research specialty, is one or several of the biggest challenges that you see facing the Middle East in terms of climate change today? And what are some of the policy issues that you see as central to mitigation? So I'll give each of you, a minute or two to kind of sketch that out so that we can start really broad and think about where we are today and where we go. So yeah, Khaloud, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Climate change is one of the main concerns around the MENA region today, and people talk about it in terms of in my work, for example, people talk a lot about water scarcity or water insecurity and what that means in terms of water levels, but also access to water in general, and in particular in relation to agriculture, livelihoods, and food security, which are concerns of the people that I work with. There is also the issue of recognizing that climate change poses a threat on our future and current circumstances. So there is the issue of, for example, the widespread of dams and unsustainable irrigation practices, and the high rates of human water consumption that are problems that need to be addressed. And these are often seen as the main concern in terms of policy. So there is the issue of water scarcity and how politicians and policymakers should look after it. And there's also the issue of how do we not only mitigate climate change, but also how to involve all the stakeholders, especially youth and the most vulnerable, in the decision-making process.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think it gives a really broad kind of overview. So with that, we'll go to Malek. What would you say from your research perspective and your background is kind of the climate change issue in the Middle East that keeps you up at night?
Okay, so first, thank you so much for having me in this panel. And I'm so excited to discuss climate change with everyone here and with the audience. So one of the problems that keeps me up at night in relation to climate change in the MENA region is water scarcity. When I did my master's in environmental policy, I focused on water security issue and the politics of water in Libya specifically, but it's all linked to the entire MENA countries, and the countries face similar issues when it comes to climate change. As Khulud said, we're talking about water scarcity, also food security, and it is directly linked to it. So when I focused on water security specifically, there are so many issues and there are so many ways when it comes to policy that needs to be focused on. For example, to achieve integrated environmental management in the MENA region, it would require institutional and regulatory reforms, long-term investment, also the lack of efficient governance. Regional cooperation is usually not tackled a lot when it comes to climate change, but also the environmental political awareness, because in today's time, climate change is addressed from a political level, and I think that the MENA region is behind when it comes to political activity in order to make a drastic shift when we're talking about different issues, whether water scarcity, also waste management is directly linked to high temperature rates and so on, and sustainable agricultural practices. So it is one of the issues that keeps me up at night, and I think that a political activity is important, but it is directly linked to having more awareness on the ground among people, and in order to have let's say a direct impact on the policy level.
Right, so sort of the public information problem too. Thank you. And with that, we'll go to Joama. How would you say is one of the biggest climate issues in your context and your research that you think about?
Hello everybody. So welcome one more time, and I'm glad to be here among you. I'm so sorry because I was driving from another city to my city to another city, and I'm doing it from my car right now. So in my point of view, the biggest issue we're facing here in the North Africa and the MENA region is the database, how we could handle the big database, how we could make the simulation in the software. So the climate change researchers provide us with a huge database, but unfortunately the use of this knowledge, of this bank of knowledge, are limited by only research institutes. So here We are looking for a science diplomacy. We're looking for a science cooperation between universities and between stakeholders. We could not work in independently. So we need to collaborate all each other to bring the climate change impact in the same pool, and we try to analyze all the data that we had. So starting from my experience here in Morocco in concerning the climate change, the biggest issue is how to manage this issue from point of view of database management, since we know that's the modeling or the mapping flood or mapping climate change impact is a important pattern for any kind of knowledge or of research. But unfortunately, this enthusiasm to develop a kind of platform where all the researchers in water or water activities in fact exchange their knowledge are always facing obstacles with stakeholders or maybe with universities. So this is for me a big challenge for young people who are working in the water field and more specifically in the environmental sector.
Yeah, thank you for that. So sort of having the information in the right pipeline. With that, I'd like to go to Vera and just hear a little bit about your kind of what keeps you up at night, big issue.
Thank you. I want to make sure that you can hear me first. Okay, because my microphone was broken. Well, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be among this beautiful group of experts. Some I know, some I do not know. So from my background, which is architecture, urban planning, and marine spatial planning, for me, the issue starts a little bit with the lifestyle that the Middle East countries are trying to adopt. We're trying to import trends and habits from places that have very different climatological contexts, a lot of different social contexts. So for example, we are building glass towers in the middle of the desert. We are driving cars that we do not necessarily need. We are eating food that doesn't grow in our lands. We are fighting wars that are not ours. So the reason why this is important, because this reflects on our demand for water. This reflects on our demand for space and our demand for all kinds of natural resources. So moving back to the spatial planning issue, my area of expertise is coastal and marine planning. So one of the main issues that are obviously facing coastal areas around the world is related to climate change. We're talking about sea level rise, we're talking about ocean acidification. All of this is affecting not only our natural environment, so not only biodiversity, fish species, bird species, but also our cultural heritage. I also work in the field of cultural heritage and marine cultural heritage, and climate change is also affecting ancient historical sites. And as you know, particularly in the Mediterranean area, we have a lot of valuable archaeological sites. So I think addressing the coastal areas as a whole, surrounding a specific sea basin, addressing both the cultural heritage aspects and the natural aspects is very important, particularly from a planning perspective. And I mentioned lifestyle because this is the lifestyle that we are demanding is basically destroying natural coasts, is destroying biodiversity hotspots because we want to expand, we want to have urbanization all over the place. So for me, coastal areas are my passion and my mission. And this is a major issue in the Middle East, particularly.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we're looking forward to hearing more about that in detail later on too. So lastly, I'll go to Mohammed just to hear a little bit about what you see as kind of the prime climate problem in your field for, just 1 or 2 minutes. Hello, Mohammed. So we seem to have lost a connection with Mohammed. If you come back online, just let me know and shoot me a message and we can go back to him. But I think we'll proceed maybe with our—
Hello.
Oh, hi, Mohammed. Can you hear us?
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great. So
hello, everyone. And thank you for inviting me to speak about the climate change in the MENA region. The indication of the climate changing climate are clearly evident in the MENA regions. and most of the predicted outcomes associated with the international climate change are already occurring in the region, which exacerbating the existing problems of water scarcity, water insecurity, water pollutions, and increasing energy demands and food insecurity. Since most of the MENA regions is arid or hyper-arid, so any small change because of the climate change impact on water availability and arable land will have significant consequences on the human security. Also, the MENA region is experiencing one of the fastest growing populations worldwide. So this is mean we need more water, more food, and more energy. And the climate change effect has intensified some trends in the climate, which resulted in lower yield of major food crops, accelerated saltwater intrusions because of the excessive and over exploitations of groundwater and the sea level rise. So these two factors has led to the salinization of coastal aquifers because we are extracting too much water from the fossil aquifer, from the freshwater aquifer, especially in the coastal area. And the sea level rise has also contributed to the salinity of the freshwater aquifers because of the saltwater intrusions. Saltwater intrusions, the movement of the saltwater to the freshwater aquifers. So we in the MENA, most of the MENA regions are running out of the groundwater. So so there's need to solve these problems, and we need to shift to renewable energy. We need to shift to desalinations, which offer great solutions to the water scarcity and water insecurity, especially in Libya and other countries that are facing the same conditions, because the salinity of water resources in many of the MENA region countries has become limiting factor for agriculture, for economic, and for social development.
Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. I think that gives a really good overview of some of the resource management questions inherent in this. So thank you all for those answers. I think that gives a really kind of good, broad bird's eye perspective of the interconnectedness of a lot of these topics and a lot of your research areas and how they all kind of interconnect. So with that, I'd like to go to a series of questions kind of along the lines of what Vera was speaking about the centrality of a lot of the Middle East's natural resources and how protecting them and more responsibly being stewards of them is basically part of this work. So I want to go to Juama. Some of the most devastating and important consequences of climate change globally and in the Middle East, as you noted, are the devastating irregular weather events that come from the rising temperatures. So changes in flooding patterns, degradation of coastlines, as well as increased human industrial. So I want you to talk a little bit about your work in flood management in coastal areas, because I think it's something that doesn't get covered very much. Where is this becoming an issue, and how is the involvement of local communities and more science-informed policymaking helping to mitigate this issue? And if you want to speak a little bit too about flood risk assessments and kind of how this type of tool can unlock a lot of smart policymaking to help both protect coastlines and also protect people who live in high flood averse areas.
So thank you one more time. So so as we know, flooding is a natural process that can happen in any time, in any moment. So it's a wide variety of location, and in the recent year are like strongly related to the climate change impact. So flooding from the sea and flooding from the river are like probably the most famous, the most known among people. But also localized rainfall can also impact and caused several flooding damages. So flooding, as we know, has a negative impact on human activities. It can threaten people's lives, their daily activities, their the economy, the infrastructure, the agriculture. So it's a big issue that we need to handle as more as we can, and we can focus more in this issue of flooding, more specifically in the coastal areas, since the coastal areas are the most weak place in the world, and more activities are focalized in these places. So the issue here is to bring a flood risk assessment or a flood risk management to face this issue. And this is what I'm working in. My research topic is focused in a coastal city, and in order to protect this city, since it's cater many touristic activities, many social development activities, and in order to protect it, we start to establish a flood risk assessment, which is known by FRAY. It's can be a flood risk assessment. It's can be undertake a large area. So the Moroccan government, and in order to face this issue, since the Morocco knows very changeable weather, are establish this flood risk assessment, but it's a national level. So we don't have it for a specific area, taking consideration the geology, the precipitation, the rainfall, everything, and the topography. So a lot of parameters that could impact the simulation of this flood management, and this could impact the issue and identify the flood zones. So if it's not already available, so it's also help us to inform the decision making in relation of zoning. So one of the most important things here in Morocco, and it's happened worldwide, it's related to the urbanization, it's the zoning. To make a decision concerning a zoning and a flood risk mitigation management measures for development a local or a more specific places. So the flood risk assessment, it could be undertaken at a range of scales relevant to the planning process. It could happen for a small area, for a small town, to the big region, to the national level, maybe to the countries, and in collaboration in the region that we're talking in is the MENA region. So here we talk about the tool. What's the positive impact of knowing the flood risk assessments? What it could bring us as a local authorities, or maybe as a researcher. So it's flood. It's aimed to identify and quantify and communicate to decision makers first, and other stakeholders like NGOs and private companies, to the risk of flooding of a land and of area. This could help them to avoid big damages. And when we talk about damages, we talk here about human and material damages. So the purpose is to provide sufficient information to determine and whether a practical action is helpful, and it's the measures that we take is a proven application for proposed development area or not. So this is the issue right over here. So as I mentioned before, my research topic focused in a coastal area, since the city where I'm working in is one of the most attractive cities in the north of Africa. So there is a big platform of tourism, there is nautic activities, and also there is agriculture. It's so famous here. And also there is a cultural heritage that we need to protect, and also a very important precipitation and topography. So the city are really facing this issue. So last but not least, is at regional level. So we can take FRA and use the flood risk assessment at regional level for regional planning guidelines, and also strategic for cities, and to develop a planning and we can use it for Alvera could witness this, could prove this, and we can use it in MCP in the marine special planning, since Vera is very expert in the field, and also for site specific, maybe for a master plan for a specific area or for a urban construction area. This are my issue and my point of view and my research, my academic, in fact, level research activity in the water sector. So thank you one more time, and think I try to be like more quick. So any case there has questions, feel free to ask me. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jaume. I think that highlights the intersection of public safety and public health and climate change, which isn't often highlighted. So actually keeping on the coast while we're here, I'd like to go to Vera and talk a little bit about your work in sustainable blue growth and the intersection of sustainable development in this context, including in marine spatial planning. So as we've talked about, one of the biggest challenges in this kind of context is the over-extractiveness of some tourism economies, while balancing that with local economic development and the needs and livelihoods of people living in these coastal regions. Can you talk a little bit more about your work in this area and how to kind of keep this balance of protection of precious local resources while also helping to forge economic growth and development?
Okay, so first to introduce the topic of maritime spatial planning. As the name entails, it has a lot to do with spatial positioning of different users, where to put what, etc. But what is underlying behind this is the temporal dimension. So what maritime spatial planning, or MSP, is bringing to the table is this temporal dimension. When we talk about human activities, particularly tourism is not happening throughout the year. Tourism has peak seasons. And it is these peak seasons and their intensity, their sudden intensity, that are causing issues related to the environment and that are exacerbating the climate change impact. Why is this important? Because in parallel to the human activities, we have the natural ecosystems. We have, for example, sea turtles nesting that happens in particular times of the year. We have the fish spawning process, and that happens also during a particular time of the year. So the challenge is to try to balance these different natural processes alongside the human activities. You have mentioned the tourism activity, but also in parallel, I would like to also address the issue of fisheries. They are both activities that are manageable. They are both activities that benefit from the ecosystem, but they are both activities that are harming the ecosystem. And this is why we try to set certain limits of growth. And every growth curve has a specific tipping point. For example, for fisheries, when you reach a specific point where you cannot produce as much fish as you're exploiting, this is the maximum yield level. Likewise, when we talk about tourism, every specific tourist attraction has what we call a carrying capacity. So we need to set a specific number of people visiting the site in order not to harm it and thus lose the exact benefit that we are coming to see. So how can we try to manage this? How can we try to balance? I have worked on different projects, like mega development projects in the region. Like we're talking about NEOM, Red Sea development, different waterfront developments in the Gulf and Kuwait, etc. And although like what they're trying to do is try to both benefit from this waterfront area and what they're receiving from it, and at the same time, they're exploiting the land, they're building. So what is the right way to do this? First of all, you need to keep in mind conservation areas. Conserve, 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 protect, protect, protect. This is the first step you need to do. Once you protected a specific area, you are able to reintroduce human activities, but in small doses. So this is one of the spatial management, but also activity management that you can do. Biosphere reserves are an exemplary example of this. It's a very good example of how human activities and nature protection are coexisting. Another thing, it's a very trendy topic, is what we call ecosystem-based approach. So instead of planning for humans, you are planning around the environment. So you're trying to see what are the ecosystems we need, and hence how can we keep them around so we can keep benefiting from it. So the ecosystem-based approach starts by assessing what are the ecosystem services we're receiving and how much can we use from these ecosystem services. So these are two examples from a very, very wide spatial planning realm, let's say. But it's important to keep in mind that the environment is the reason we are here. It's the reason we are alive. It is supporting us. It's giving us the air we breathe, the water we drink. So if we overexploit it at the end, we won't exist, but it will still persist. So this is in a summary, a little bit about maritime spatial planning.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think there's frequently a kind of wrong-headed way of thinking about this issue in the context of the Middle East, which is that people just overuse resources, or that there's a scarcity, or that there's something about the lifestyle of people or the region in the Middle East that makes it extra extractive. But as you've talked about, I think it's a careful balance between understanding the political and economic decision-making that actually gets us to the over-extracting and how that intersects with governance and what people actually need and want on the ground. So kind of in that theme, I want to move to the next set of questions, which is more about the intersection of the human context into these environmental resources, which will also be about food and water security, which some of you touched on, which is a critical issue. Much as what is missed on this topic of climate change in Washington right now, from my perspective, is its relevance to impending losses in food and water security that are going on right now. This isn't a future thing. This is an ongoing, even a past thing. And the long-term viability of certain key crops, especially in regions of the Middle East that rely intensely on food imports, and the over-extractiveness of extraction of certain aquifers and salination of soil and things like this. So I want to go to Khaloud, and just to think about the intersection of food security and climate change and migration in the Middle East, which is something that is just, I think, beginning to be spoken about more broadly here in Washington, but obviously is not widely talked about enough, I don't think. Can you talk more about the context of climate migration in the Middle East, and what are some important things to keep in mind as we start thinking about policies toward this topic, given how politically charged and how sometimes oversimplified it can be?
Thank you. Yeah, this is a very interesting topic to think about, and specifically, as you said, because it's not researched enough and not talked about enough. And when we think about climate change, it is obvious that adverse weather trends such as increased flooding and drought can shape the decisions to migrate made by households and individuals. But within the larger framework of migration in the MENA region, we don't see migration, we don't see climate change as one of the main factors. Actually, research shows that only 10 to 20% of those decide to migrate might be induced by the change of the climate or climate change. However, if we think about the larger perspective of migration in the MENA region and the other reasons that people talk about, people would be talking about searching for employment, better opportunities for children, education, for example, and so on. And when we rethink these reasons, these are related or can be related to climate change. For example, when we talk about economic activity in a country like Morocco, where half of the workforce works in agriculture, and when we talk about agriculture being affected by drought or other weather patterns, then that also leads to rural urban migration, and how that also would lead to how that would affect people who would be looking for economic opportunities such as employment or well-established community networks, for example. So there is that correlation, and there's also the possibility to have better access to schools, of course, healthcare, electricity, clean water, functioning sewage system, and so on. So all these issues have to do with the how countries also mitigate climate change, and how people who are depending, for example, on agriculture, which is like a very important aspect of people's lives in many countries of the Middle East, and how if the population lives on land with poor agricultural potential, which is sensitive to changes in rainfall, for example, how would that affect their future patterns of movement? So it is most likely that in the future there'll be more climate-induced migration, especially if we're talking about the Middle East, it will be to Europe. And that also means that there is a need to think about the conflicts in the area and how these conflicts are related to climate change and to other natural resources, or the fight over natural resources, let's say, and how these might affect the future of the region in the coming years, and also how the development of like how mitigation and development of different sustainability plans can help reduce migration induced by climate change in the future. But this is, as I said, this is a topic that is not researched enough. And in my research, for example, I look at household activities and one-to-one kind of cases, but there is a need for a larger survey and understanding of how climate change will affect migration in the future, in a already vulnerable countries like the countries of the Middle East.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one common misconception that I see here in Washington is people think of climate migration as this big thing coming in the future and don't understand that it's already happened. It's already happening even in some cases in the US, for example, and that it's not as oversimplified as, you know, masses of people in this kind of racialized thinking going to Europe, but it's happening all around us, and it has to do not just with agricultural economies, but with the needs of job seeking and education seeking as well. So kind of in keeping in that theme, I want to go to Malek now, kind of talking more about agriculture and its intersection with human vulnerability. You've written a lot about lost opportunities for agribusiness and sustainable agriculture in Libya in particular, which is a context we don't often get to hear about in the context of climate change mitigation, including through a recent policy brief you wrote that discusses the challenges faced by farmers in Tripoli and how better policymaking could address that issue. Can you talk a little bit more about some of the challenges to the agricultural sector, in particular in Libya, and how this relates to creating a more sustainable political, economic outlook for its inhabitants in the future?
Yeah, okay, so for agriculture, when I focused on this topic specifically, and when it comes to Libya, we usually forget this topic and we would focus on the oil sector and what opportunities it would provide, and it has been providing, let's say, economic stability until the revolution in 2011. And after that, we could see many issues arise because of the political instability and the fluctuating economic situation in the country, which made people realize that there are other problems that we should focus on in relation to the environment. So we started to look at water availability issues, also agriculture. So when I decided to tackle this problem specifically, in the beginning, it was mainly about balancing the food import to export ratio, because Libya depends heavily on food imports, and that is due to the constraint by the limited arable land and also low soil fertility. The certain resources are considered two great challenges for agricultural development, specifically in Libya, and the intrusion of the seawater into the groundwater that some of the colleagues here mentioned many times. So when I had this idea, it was mainly about how we can actually have and grow food more locally, even if these issues, or let's say challenges, are available. But then I wanted to focus on a local level, so I decided to focus on a small scale on the capital, since Tripoli, the capital, is the center of the economic activity in Libya. It also has many opportunities, and also the agricultural activity in the city has been prevailing since the 1970s due to the allocation of land by the former regime to families in the area, since it was, or let's say it is still an agricultural land, and people had these lands to grow their food, to secure their food and also their consumption of different crops in order to achieve, let's say, food self-sufficiency. But that was not the case when the oil sector was providing the revenues for people, especially working in the public sector. So many of the challenges that I noticed when I talked to farmers throughout my research on the development or the need of developing an agribusiness model in Tripoli specifically, many of the problems, for example, the continuous electricity cuts. Electricity cuts have been happening in Libya since 2011, let's say 2012. And that is directly linked to also shortage in water, because water is being pumped through electricity. So with the long electricity cuts, water is not available. So people, especially farmers who have been having farms for years. I mean, some of the farmers I've been talking with, they had farms since the 1960s, some in the 70s, some in even the 80s. So they have been an ongoing activity, which was faced by many issues since 2011 with the power cuts, also the lack of security. It's something that farmers have been facing, and it pushed many farmers to stop their activity for a while, because some of them can't really actually reach their farms because of the location of these farms in Tripoli, especially around the suburbs. And also due to the severe economic situation, farmers can no longer finance their farms on their own. Before 2011, there were some agricultural loans. Also, this economic situation was way different than the situation after 2011. So that even pushed people to actually stop financing their farms, because they would require a high level of investment, which the farmer cannot sustain on his own. And also, especially that some of them depend on workers, foreign labor, for example, and they have to finance foreign labor as well. And it's not the case for many farmers. So even with these problems, I noticed that they are able to grow from the interviews I had with them, but the issue still was financial, was related to security, was related to water availability, was even related to awareness of the agricultural crops that they need to grow, because some of them don't really understand what is the right way to grow certain crops, for example. So through the policy paper, I understood that it's not really about reducing food imports or even balancing the food import to export ratio. It was mainly about understanding what is happening locally. What can we do to support local farmers in order to shift them to have some sort of a sustainable activity? And another issue was the lack of connection whatsoever with governmental institutions. I mean, the municipalities' role in Tripoli, for example, is considered very, very, very limited, and farmers do not really have any sort of connection with them in terms of providing support, because one of the key policy recommendations was to have governmental aid, and that can be done through municipalities, and it is easier to have it through municipalities within specific areas that are focused on agricultural activity in Tripoli, for example. So it was essential to connect or to have some sort of connection between the private sector, and here I'm talking about businessmen or agri entrepreneurs, also the public sector in terms of the Ministry of Agriculture, the municipalities, and I believe that the role of municipalities is quite crucial here because if the municipalities provide the aid in terms of material required, let's say seeds, farming machines, and so on, it can reduce the pressure that the farmers are having, and it can help them sustain their farms. Because what have been happening in recent years, since 2014, some actually farmers decided to sell their lands and transfer them into residential buildings, and it shouldn't be the case. It's more about how we can boost the confidence of these farmers through having an economic support, to having a governmental support, and also how we can have some sort of regional cooperation, let's say a support from international organizations like the FAO and the World Food Program. They have been providing support in relation to agriculture in Libya in general, not only in Tripoli, but how we can actually facilitate this support in a sustainable manner. So, with the issues that I have explained here, it was clear to me that it is essential to have an agribusiness model in order to support farmers locally and to understand their needs, how to use the crop that they have locally in order to boost the awareness of people and to have a shift from the usual narrative about the oil sector to focusing more on the agricultural sector and to have a more understanding and a better understanding from a local level.
Yeah, thank you so much, Malak. I mean, I don't know about all of you, but the more I hear about each of these issues and all of your work, the more I wish we had like 5 hours to get into all of it. But unfortunately, we're in our last 10 minutes, so I do want to move the questions to talking about solutions and policymaking going forward. So with that, I'd like to turn to Mohammed, who is interested in the issue of desalination and how this emerging technology, it's not emerging exactly, but it's becoming more advanced every day, can be a solution to potentially finding new sources of potable water and industrial use water. So Mohammed, can you tell us a little bit about desalination and how it might fit into good policymaking as we go forward?
Yeah, because of the political instability in Libya and the lack of the institutional cooperations and poor management of water, so there is really a problem here in Libya about water shortage and water insecurity. So we don't have enough water. And also, sometimes some armed group control the flow of water to some of the cities. Currently, Libya mainly depends on the man-made river project, which is mainly built to transport or to transport the underground water from the south to the north through a huge through a network of a huge underground pipes. So many times, especially after 2011, armed group has suddenly stopped the flow of water to some cities, which led to shortage of water to the household and to crops failures, and also cause a damage to those pipes, which are very expensive, so after a long period of time, this man-made river will need great maintenance, and to transport water from north to south require lots amount of energy. So instead of that, Libya have a long coast, and the Libyan populations live in the coast. So if the government could invest more in desalination, So that would solve the problem, if we build desalinations to produce fresh water from the sea, and and most of the cities are in the coast, so we don't need to transport water. We need to build like a small capacity standalone desalination in every city, so there will be no water security that is happening now. This desalination could be run by solar energy. So Libya is considered a good place to produce solar energy and energy. It's good to combat the climate change. We need to shift more toward clean energy, and we should allocate some of the oil. Libya is a rich oil country, to shift toward clean energy. So by through solar desalination, we could produce fresh water. We solve the water shortage issue, and also we reduce greenhouse gas of CO2 and other emissions into the atmosphere, and we solve the problem of our cut. We have have the problem of power. If we shift to renewable energy, that will solve the problem. I think we need about the renewable energy. We need to do a win-win opportunity with Europe.
Hello,
Hello?
Mohammed. Sorry,
Hello?
your sound is cutting out a lot, and we might have to stop it there for now. I'm sorry about that. So just as we shift to the last question, I'd like each of you to, in a minute or so, just maybe think about how can we get, more types of people, more vulnerable people, more local communities, and especially more young people involved in this type of work. How do you see maybe moving toward that so that policymaking going forward can be more locally rooted and more sustainable? And I'll go to Vera first for that.
Yes, thank you. The answer is very utopic because obviously in the Middle East, we haven't even entered into the political and geopolitical complications that we have. And the reason why people are not involved, the reason why our governments are formed by old men, we didn't even enter on why did we reach such a bad state. So this alone is a topic of discussion. So if you want to talk utopically, how we can include the youth, how we can involve them, I think we can follow. I work a lot with the EU. I'm currently working in France. And what they do is that they have people dedicated to performing surveys, people dedicated to designing questionnaires to local communities to really understand what their needs are, what their perceptions are. Are they aware of the environmental damage? Are they aware of a specific topic? And based on these surveys, which necessitate a lot of work and a lot of background research, we are able to direct policies. We are able to understand where we can put our investments are. Should we invest in knowledge? Should we invest in education? Should we invest in infrastructure instead? So this is one way, is to really get to the root of these local communities. And in the coastal communities particularly, it's very hard to reach out to them because they're often poor communities, they're fishermen families, and it's very complicated to reach out. We have language boundaries, we have technology access boundaries. So all of this is something that someone who knows the local context should be aware of in order to design the surveys or the format of these surveys. Another way is to really understand how each community works. Are they religion organization? Are they political organizations that are very active on the ground? In Lebanon, it's a very, very sensitive topic because each region is somehow, I would say, dominated by a particular political party or religious group. And we often go against these groups, but sometimes working with them can actually reach good solutions. reached good results, and this has been an example of success in the south of Lebanon, particularly in disaster risk management. So instead of going against these groups, instead of going just bypassing them, it's important to include them in the decision-making process and design the policies accordingly. Of course, using experts, because you cannot just follow what the people want without having experts giving their opinion and their background.
Right, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. With that, I think we can go maybe a minute or two over just to hear from the rest of you. So Malak, do you have any thoughts on this quickly? Like, what are some ways to integrate more types of people into these discussions?
I think mainly if we can focus on educational programs, how we can actually start this from a young age, because I believe that educational curriculums are another issue that we need to understand. Some curriculums have not been developed or made in a way that matches what's happening now. So I think educational programs are key in order to tackle the issue of climate change, and to start with young children and to introduce them to the problem that is happening not only internationally but even locally. To give examples, to also have continuous campaigns. Campaigns are key, and as Vera said, to connect with organizations on the ground, which organizations are active and how we can link these together, how these local organizations, how can they work with the, let's say, the educational ministry, from public schools to private schools, how to engage different age groups, and also in different languages, not necessarily in English only, but to focus on the local language in order to connect with people more. But starting from a young age, I think it is really, really important in order to have a better understanding and to make sense of this issue.
Yeah, knowledge access is so crucial. We're just going to go a minute or two over because I think it's really important to hear from the last of you on this. So Khaloud, why don't we go to you and we'll just get some quick input. This could be its own panel, and I hope it is in the future, but to hear what you think about this question.
I think it's very important to rework how governments finance their programs in general. So for example, if we take one country in the MENA region where arms trade and the army gets 30% of their annual budget and agriculture and environment gets 3% of the budget, then we see the imbalance. And I think there need to be budgeting to environmental projects that includes environmental education, climate resilient infrastructure, working on educational programs, research, and so on. So the higher, I think, the budgeting that goes towards what really matters in climate action within the country, the more it is possible to mitigate climate change, and also to put the right people there. So to include women, to include young people, to include the people with the expertise to make that action happen.
Yeah, no, that's crucial. Joama, do you have thoughts on this as we close out?
Hi. So for me, basically, I since I work in the field of education, I was shared the same point of view with Malak. So we need to focus more on education, especially in the region where I'm living. People facing big obstacles in to study. So instead of this big programs, we need to focus more in programs that gather how to engage youth, how to give you the self-confidence. So here there is like a really complicated relation between the teacher and students. So there's like a big hole between them. So we need like to have like a bridge, to have freedom of to speak and freedom to express themselves. So this is one of the biggest issues that we face in here, is to work in education and also to raise awarenesses and technique, how to debate, how to accept information from others. So here in Arabian countries, people like, we are more close in our opinion. We are not accepting others' point of view, so we try as more as we can to say that everything that we talk is a fact and we believe in it. So we need to have like a generation of people who accept others and on the way of who they are, no matter what their culture or religion or geographic places that we're living in. So we need to accept the knowledge, to exchange our knowledge, and this could lead us to a good science diplomacy. That means bring science to the daily activities, to protect human beings, to protect the earth, and make a better place for me, from the next generation, and for my kid who are screaming on my back in the car right over here. Say hello. Hold on. I will show you. Wait a minute.
So while you're doing that, Mohammed, do you want to just...
Hey.
Oh, hi.
Bye.
Hello.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Okay, Mohammed, let's go to you and just finish out with your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I totally agree with my colleagues about the importance of awareness campaigns about the impact of the climate change. And this is need to be led by civil society, by governments, by even international NGOs. There is more need for top-down initiatives and down-top initiatives to fight the climate change. And we need for the basic education and awareness program in schools and in universities. We need more training, more awareness program for professional and technical people. And a good way or creative way to encourage youth and community in the MENA region to engage more with the issue of the climate change is by finding way to connect it with the challenge, with the challenges that they are facing. For example, green entrepreneurships. This is will help to fight the climate change, and this is will create more job opportunities and will develop the economic growth for our country. For example, installing renewable energy in households. Will reduce the fuel and heating cost. And also we need to aware people, for example, about the environmental effects of burning waste, because many communities they don't have they have inadequate waste management system, so they deliberately burn waste, so that will have a health impact on them. So when we explain that to them, this will help this community to engage more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mohammed. Thank you all so much for joining us and for going over a couple of minutes. Thank you for bearing with us. I think we can agree that there is a wealth of things to be learned here, and I'm hoping to do follow-up panels or discussions with each of you on the broad range of topics and all of your amazing research and policy ideas that we've shared today. Thank you again for joining us. And if you have further questions, feel free to just shoot us a message at events@mei.edu. And we hope to see you for the rest of